The armed forces of Ukraine are significantly increasing both the number and effectiveness of strikes on Russian heat and power generation facilities. The actions of Ukraine's defense forces are a response to the ongoing strikes on Ukraine's civilian and critical infrastructure.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at Russia's military-industrial enterprises and energy system.
By trying to leave Ukrainians without electricity, the Russian dictator is condemning millions of Russians to a dark and cold winter.
If they threaten a blackout, for example, in the capital of Ukraine, the Kremlin must realize that a blackout will also come to the Russian capital.
There's no electricity anywhere at all in Belgorod.
Since the beginning of November, Ukraine has carried out dozens of strikes on Russian power substations. Long-range drones are cutting off electricity in occupied Donetsk and Crimea.
Basically, charge your phones. Looks like they've decided to cut off our power everywhere. I've already counted more than 30 of them.
What? Kaluzhskaya 32, darkness. And then it keeps going darkness, darkness, darkness.
And cruise missiles and jet-powered drones are introducing millions of residents in the European part of Russia, including Moscow and the Moscow region, to the delights of blackouts. In addition to Ukrainian weapons, we shouldn't forget about the supply of Western arms, which Ukraine has also recently started using to strike Russian territory.
The corresponding approval has been received. Therefore, we can say that the territories of the Rostov, Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions are within the strike zone of Western strike systems. I want to emphasize again, attacks with Scalp, Storm Shadow, and accordingly, only the modernized version of the S-200 surface-to-air missile system.
Before the onset of winter, Ukraine possesses a wide range of powerful long-range weaponry. Bark, Pekla, Polyanitsia, and FP-1 rocket drones, as well as Flaminga and Long Neptune cruise missiles, can reach the largest Russian cities, including heating and power supply facilities in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Taking into account the climatic features of the Russian Federation and the tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian side's strike capabilities, the Russian Federation is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, this concerns thermal power plants and other production facilities that sustain the life of major Russian cities.
First of all, at least 4 were destroyed, and secondly, 2 radars were also eliminated. And that's not counting the fact that a dozen such systems may have been damaged.
New details, new conclusions. It turns out that the strike on Novorossiysk on the night of November 14th not only marked the collapse of Russian oil supplies, but also became the most powerful blow to Russian air defense systems during the entire war.
Ukraine carried out one of the most devastating strikes against Russian air defenses. It destroyed 4 S-400 launchers and 2 radar stations from this battery at once.
Ukrainian media reported this yesterday, citing sources in the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU. It became known that 4 S-400 Triumph launchers were completely destroyed. They were located on the territory of the Kuban Red Banner Regiment's military unit. In total, there were 12 such launchers at the site. The security service believes that some of the others were also partially hit. As a result, the entire division has been put out of action.
If anything is overlooked in this regard, then when these launchers need to operate, an emergency situation could occur, which could again lead to the detonation of the launcher or cause the missile to fly off course. In short, there could be a wide variety of different and significant consequences in this particular case if some seemingly minor or insignificant issue is completely overlooked. So basically, at this critical point, the entire base could potentially be written off entirely.
At the same time, 2 expensive radars were destroyed at once. These were from the same long-range air threat detection systems and the target acquisition radar, which was actually guiding those very S-400s. But even multi-million-dollar losses aren't the main issue here. What's more important is that right now the Russians simply have nothing to replace the lost equipment with.
Well, while it's still possible to somehow replace the launchers, it's extremely difficult to replace the radar stations, as you know. Because each radar station is a high-tech instrument, and under sanctions, assembling them is very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. Here, there were 2 radar stations at once, and both were operating as part of a specific battery. In other words, the battery has fallen apart. Now it needs to find new radar stations, in other words, new eyes, without which air defense is useless.
What our defense forces used to strike Novorossiysk still remains unclear. It is likely that it was the SBU operating drones. However, several Ukrainian special services were involved in the attack at once. So analysts agree that the strike was a combined one. You just have to make a wish at night. Maybe that was the wish for Novorossiysk. You see, wishes have a way of coming true. So this is the kind of menu from the defense forces, and it's always a pleasure. But seriously, if we're talking about the systematic nature of such strikes, it's so systematic that they hit 2 or 3 times. It's also worth noting that the destruction of military equipment and port infrastructure in Novorossiysk is just the culmination of the entire operation, which was carefully prepared, and along the way, many other Russian targets were destroyed.
To reach Novorossiysk itself, they first had to strike Crimea. Literally the day before, there were strikes on Feodosia, and at the same time on the Feodosia oil depot. The Kirovsky airfield near Feodosia was also hit, along with the Feodosia Air Defense District. This is what allowed our missile operators and drone pilots to reach Novorossiysk. This is a very high-value target.
At the same time, the same sources in the SBU add that for now, an entire air defense division in Novorossiysk has been put out of action. There is now a huge gap in Russian defenses which will undoubtedly be exploited by Ukrainian drones and missiles.
The Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on Russian oil refineries are setting new records in both range and frequency.
We are not acting outside the law.
We are striking only legitimate targets. Oil extraction, oil refining. That's 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are dirty oil rubles with which the enemy is killing us. And if we look at the statistics for September and October of this year, that's 20 targets. Among them are 6 oil refineries, 2 oil terminals, 3 oil depots, and 9 oil pumping stations.
As of
early November 2025, Ukraine had carried out 111 strikes on oil depots and refineries in Russia. For comparison, there were 94 such episodes in all of 2024. As a result, the Russian Federation has colossal problems with the volume of crude oil processing, as well as a shortage of fuel and gasoline in the domestic market.
what
Did this lead to? This led to a 20% deficit in the domestic petroleum products market and the idling of 37% of oil refining capacity, as well as a fuel shortage in 57 regions of the Russian Federation and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
because of the ban on gasoline exports up to 50 to 40.
Federal Highway M12 Moscow-Kazan. On the highway, there's one gas station every 150 kilometers, and at each station there are lines of cars stretching 1.5 to 2 kilometers just to get fuel. I'll show you what this looks like now. When you'll actually be able to refuel is anyone's guess. Yana counted ahead of us. 130 cars.
But it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. The range of strikes on Russian oil refineries has almost doubled. If last year the farthest target was the Salavat oil refinery in Bashkortostan, about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, on October 6, 2025, Ukrainian drones reached the Tyumen oil refinery, which is more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
According to calculations by journalists from the publication Vertka, the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes is 85%. Out of 250 strikes since the start of the full-scale war, 213 have been effective. Many facilities, especially in southern Russia, have been attacked repeatedly. For example, the Ryazan, Volgograd and Ilsky oil refineries have each been attacked 10 times. In order
to put this war into a stalemate, to turn the tide, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to disrupt their logistics and suppress their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
During the course of the war, Ukraine first launched from scratch and then significantly ramped up the production of long-range and rocket drones. Russian oil refineries are being terrorized by UAVs like Lyuty, Polyanitsia, Peklo and FP1. Drones costing just a few $1,000s are causing damage to the Russian budget worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Look at those guys. That's the 7th significant hit, still burning. That's the 7th drone that just arrived.
At the same time, following the drones, Ukraine is also ramping up the production of long-range missiles. According to experts, if Ukraine uses cruise missiles like the Flamingo with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, there won't be a trace left of Russian oil refineries.
If a strike hits an oil refinery, it will be impossible to restore that refinery. That is, it will be completely, if before you could, when a drone hits, you could replace the damaged parts with spares in a few weeks or a month. But in this case, everything will be destroyed down to the ground. The entire distillation column will be completely wiped out. And after 2 pairs of such missiles, all that will remain of the refinery are memories.
The trend is that there will be more and more strikes in the future, and gasoline and other fuels in Russia are becoming scarcer. In the
night of November 9th, the Ukrainian armed forces struck the Voronezh thermal power plant. After the strike, electricity disappeared in several homes, but then came back. The Voronezh thermal power plant is one of the largest suppliers of thermal energy in the region and provides it to 4 districts of the city.
Right before my eyes, I had just stepped out onto the balcony. Right over there, just... Apparently it was along the power lines, basically. No, well, I heard 3, but they're saying 4. In
Belgorod, this incident was attacked, leaving tens of thousands of residents without power. The governor of the region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, stated that the damage is very serious.
As a result of last night's rocket attack, there is serious damage to the power and heating supply systems of the city of Belgorod. Our energy workers, as always, are heroically trying to cope with the task at hand. Right now, they are working to restore what was damaged by our enemies.
A day earlier, Ukrainian drones struck energy facilities in Saratov, Engels, and the Volgograd region. There too, power outages were reported. With massive drone and missile attacks, Russia is trying to plunge Ukraine into a blackout. In turn, the Ukrainian army is carrying out symmetrical strikes on Russia's energy sector. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the authorities are ready and will not only defend the infrastructure but also strike back in response.
What will happen with the electricity? Today it's hard for me to say. We will be ready for any retaliatory challenges. We work on this every day. We will defend, we will fight. The Russians must know that step by step we will increase the production of everything so that they also feel what we feel. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. In
2025, there is a trend toward a growing electricity shortage in Russia. As of October this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid reaches tens of gigawatts. This was reported by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
Due to demand from industrial, residential, and municipal consumers exceeding the total generation of all power plants, as of October this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid has already reached 25 gigawatts. Despite attempts by the REF government to introduce at least some measures to stabilize its energy system, such as financial compensation or discounts on electricity bills for voluntarily reducing consumption during peak hours, as well as disconnecting consumers who do not require guaranteed power supply, the growing electricity deficit points to a systemic crisis in the Russian energy sector. The Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
In addition to wear and overload, systematic strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces are also affecting the Russian energy system. If Ukrainian strikes even partially damage Russian thermal power plants, this will cause significant problems for Russia's energy sector. The Ukrainian armed forces have already brought a blackout in southern Russia 60% closer.
Strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces are gradually knocking out high-voltage substations, which make it possible to transfer electricity from one region to another. If thermal power plants are also destroyed, their situation will become significantly more difficult than ours. Alexander Karchenko, director of the Energy Research Center.
Not only Russian regions, but also Moscow are suffering from Ukrainian drone attacks and power outages. This has a very serious, not just propagandistic significance directly for the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself. At least that's how Putin and his inner circle explained it. Now we see the war coming directly to Moscow. And not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding. Ukrainians have long since gotten used to and adapted to power and heating outages. But for Russians, this comes as an unexpected surprise. So it's time to start stocking up on matches, candles, and firewood.